The rain had not yet come, but the air in Manhattan carried that heavy weight, the kind of weight that pressed against glass towers and made the city hum with impatience. Inside the grand ballroom of the Hayes Foundation, gala chandeliers spilled light like falling stars. Guests shimmered in gowns and tuxedos. Champagne glasses glittered in their hands. Laughter rose in polished waves. It was the kind of night where people believed money could buy anything, even grace. Adrian Hayes stood near the balcony doors, tall, composed every inch, the billionaire CEO people whispered about. His suit was cut sharp, his tie loosened just enough to show he had survived another night of handshakes and hollow praise. Cameras had followed him all evening. Journalists had asked the same questions. What were his plans for the Company for Innovation for Charity? And Adrian had given them the same polished answers. He knew the performance. He knew the emptiness behind it. His eyes drifted over the crowd, restless. He had given his speech about empowering women in business, about lifting communities, and the applause had thundered. Yet as the orchestra shifted into another song, and couples swayed under the golden light, he felt alone, more alone than ever. That loneliness was something he carried like an invisible scar, one that had followed him for years, since the accident that had taken away the woman he once thought would be his future. In the shadows near the service hallway, Maya Carter adjusted the tray in her hands. She wore the black uniform of the catering staff, her hair tied back her face, pale under the weight of exhaustion. She had been working shifts at 2 different restaurants, cleaning offices at night, anything to pay rent. This gala job had come through a friend who promised it was easy money. She had not expected the men here to look at her as though she were another glass of wine waiting to be poured. She saw Adrian once from across the room. He had been speaking to an investor, his expression calm, his profile strong against the city lights beyond the glass. There was something unreachable about him, something that did not belong to this noisy ballroom. She looked away quickly. People like him lived in another world. People like her only passed through unnoticed, but not everyone ignored her. Victor Cross had not. He was a man with presence, broad-shouldered, older a titan in real estate, with a reputation whispered in corners. His smile carried power, but his hands carried something darker. He had been watching her all evening. When he cornered her near the hallway, no one noticed. The music drowned her voice when she said no. His grip was steel as he pulled her into a side room, whispering about debts, about how she should be grateful. She had known him before, known his cruelty, in moments she had tried to forget. Maya struggled the tray, clattering to the floor. For a heartbeat, she thought this was the end of whatever fragile strength she had left. But a noise in the hallway startled Victor, a security guard passing too close. In that sliver of distraction, she tore herself free, bolting through the back exit, clutching the torn sleeve of her dress to her chest. Her breath came sharp as knives. She ran. The city swallowed her footsteps. Taxi horns blaring, neon lights flickering. She had no plan, only one thought: Adrian Hayes. Hours earlier, he had brushed past her tray when someone jostled him. She had steadied the glasses, expecting anger. Instead, he had paused, met her eyes, and with the faintest smile said, "Thank you." It had been nothing, a fragment of kindness, but in a world where every look felt like judgment, that moment had felt like salvation. Now she clung to it. She remembered his name, his foundation, the building where he lived, a place people whispered about like it was a palace in the sky. She followed memory, instinct, desperation, until her feet carried her to the private entrance of the Hayes Tower penthouse. Adrian had just returned. The chauffeur had left. The city sprawled beneath him, endless and hollow. He slipped the keycard through the lock when he heard it soft knocking, uneven, more like a plea than a knock. He turned. There she was, her hair wild mascara streaked down her cheeks, the sleeve of her uniform torn nearly off. She hugged herself, trembling her body, wrapped in a coat that looked borrowed too thin for the night. Her eyes met his wide, frantic, and filled with a shame that went deeper than the bruises on her skin. He froze. For a long second, neither spoke. The world outside moved in the rush of traffic, the thrum of music from far-off clubs, but in the hall there was only silence, charged and heavy. Maya's lips trembled. The words scraped out of her throat, small and broken. "You don't want me. I am broken." The confession hung in the air like smoke. Adrian stepped forward, instinct pulling him closer, even as reason urged caution. He pulled off his coat, holding it out, his voice low. "You are freezing. Take this." Her hands shook as she reached the coat, slipping. And in that moment, as the fabric fell, he saw the marks, the bruises like fingerprints burned into her arms, a scar running across her shoulder blade, the cruel history etched into her skin. His heart stopped, not in desire but in fury, not in lust but in grief. This was no stranger. This was someone the world had decided to discard, and somehow she had landed on his doorstep. Maya clutched the coat back to her body, ashamed. She looked away, expecting disgust, expecting the door to close. Instead, Adrian took a slow breath and opened the door wider. "Come in," he said simply. She hesitated, the city air biting her skin. Then, as though she had no choice left, she stepped past him into the vast silence of the penthouse. Inside, glass walls rose to the ceiling, showing the city glittering like stars spilled across black velvet. The luxury was overwhelming, but to Maya it felt unreal, like stepping into another planet. She stood still, wrapped in the coat, clutching the edges, as though it were the only shield she had. Adrian set the keys down, watching her carefully. He did not ask questions, not yet. He only crossed to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, and set it on the counter where she could reach. She whispered again, as if reminding herself, "I am not clean." He turned his gaze steady. "You are here. That is enough." Her eyes filled with tears. She lowered her head, and for the first time in a long time allowed herself to breathe. Maya sat in the corner of the penthouse living room, the coat wrapped around her like armor. Her knees pulled close to her chest. The silence pressed against her ears, so different from the chaos she had just fled. The room was all glass and steel-polished stone floors. Art pieces she could never name, yet what struck her most was not the wealth but the quiet. She had grown up in noise arguments through thin walls, sirens in the night, the clatter of cheap locks rattling on doors. Quiet felt unnatural, almost dangerous, and she sat there waiting for someone to shout. Adrian moved slowly across the room, loosening his tie, his expression unreadable. He had seen countless faces at galas and in boardrooms, but never a face like hers. Fragile yet defiant, marked by pain yet unbroken. He wanted to ask questions, but he knew if he pressed too hard, she might shatter. Instead, he poured a second glass of water and placed it on the table between them. "Drink," he said softly. She glanced at it, Then at him, her lips pressed tight. "I am not here to hurt you," Adrian added, his voice steady, patient. "You do not have to speak tonight." She reached for the glass with trembling hands, sipped and whispered almost to herself, "I do not belong here." Adrian leaned back against the sofa, studying her. "Belonging has nothing to do with walls or money," he replied. She shook her head, her voice cracking. "You would not say that if you knew where I came from." For a long moment, she stared at the skyline beyond, the glass lights blinking, like constellations she would never touch. Then, as though the dam had broken, the words spilled. "My mother died when I was 16. My father, he drinks until he forgets his own name. I worked nights to keep us alive, restaurants, cleaning anything. That is how I met him." Her throat closed on the word, but she forced it out. "Victor." Adrian's jaw tightened, the name sour on his tongue. She continued, her hands gripping the coat tighter. "He offered to pay off debts, said he would protect me. For a while I believed him. But protection came with a price. His anger was a cage. His kindness was a lie." She lifted her arm slightly, the coat slipping just enough to show another bruise. Adrian looked away for a moment, not because he could not bear it, but because he feared the rage rising in him. When he turned back, his voice was low. "And tonight," she swallowed, "tonight he tried to remind me that I am his. But I am not. I ran. That is all I know how to do." Adrian let the silence settle before he spoke. "Running takes strength. Do not confuse survival with weakness." Her eyes lifted to his, surprised by the words, searching his face, as though testing if he meant them. He did. In his own way, Adrian understood. He too had run from memories, burying himself in work, avoiding attachments, pretending the ghosts did not follow him home. He saw something of himself in her, and it unsettled him. After a while he stood. "There is a guest room down the hall. It is yours as long as you need it." Maya hesitated, then rose, still clutching the coat, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. She paused at the doorway, looked back at him. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Adrian met her gaze. "Because someone once helped me when I did not deserve it," he said. She nodded slowly, disappearing into the shadows of the hallway. Adrian remained in the living room, staring at the city, at his reflection in the glass. He had not let anyone close in years, not since the accident. But tonight, fate had placed a broken girl at his door, and something in his chest stirred something he thought he had buried forever. The following morning, the city woke with its usual roar, but inside the penthouse the world moved slower. Maya emerged cautiously, wearing one of Adrian's shirts that hung loose on her small frame. She looked out of place among the polished marble counters and the modern art, but there was a quiet dignity in the way she carried herself, even in borrowed clothes. Adrian was in the kitchen, attempting something he had not done in years, cooking breakfast. The smell of coffee and eggs filled the air, a simple gesture in a place that usually ran on catered meals and assistance. She watched him for a moment before whispering, "You do not have to do that." He glanced over his shoulder, a faint smile touching his lips. "I know. Sit. Eat." She sat carefully at the edge of the stool, her fingers brushing the countertop, as if testing whether it was real. When he placed a plate before her, she whispered "thank you" so softly he almost did not hear it. They ate in silence at first, but it was not the heavy silence of the night before. It was tentative, a silence that carried possibility. Over the next few days, small changes unfolded. Maya explored cautiously, wandering the hall, lined with books standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows, as though the city might swallow her whole. Adrian worked from home more often. His meetings shifted to screens. His attention divided in ways his board would not understand. He noticed details, the way she hummed under her breath. When she thought she was alone, the way her hands trembled less each morning, the way she avoided mirrors. One evening he found her in the study, staring at a painting hung on the far wall, an abstract swirl of blues and golds. "Do you like it?" he asked. Maya startled, then nodded slowly. "It feels like water," she said, like drowning and breathing at the same time. Adrian stepped closer. "The artist was a friend of my late fiancé. She painted it after the accident." Maya looked at him surprised. "You lost someone?" He nodded. "The only person I thought I could build a life with. She was gone in seconds, and I have been running ever since." For a moment, they stood in silence, their griefs echoing in the same space. Then Maya whispered, "Maybe broken things recognize each other." He met her gaze, and something unspoken passed between them. The distance between billionaire and runaway, blurred, not erased, but bridged by pain. Another night rain finally fell, against the glass walls streaking the city in silver. Maya sat curled on the sofa, sketching absently in a notebook Adrian had given her. He watched from across the room, the soft scratch of pencil mingling with the rhythm of rain. When she looked up, their eyes met. The air tightened, charged a flicker of something deeper passing between them. She shifted the shirt, slipping slightly from her shoulder, revealing a scar. Adrian's breath caught not in desire, but in the pull of compassion and the sharp edge of attraction he tried to suppress. Maya saw the conflict in his eyes and quickly pulled the fabric back up. "I cannot," she whispered. "I am not clean." Adrian's voice was rough when he answered, "You are not broken. You are surviving." She stared at him, her eyes wet her lips, parted as though the words had cracked something open inside her. For the first time in years, someone had not looked at her with pity or hunger, but with belief. She turned back to her sketch, but her hands no longer shook. In those days, trust grew slowly, like dawn breaking through fog. Adrian began to notice her laughter rare but bright, and Maya began to notice the man beneath the billionaire, a man who read late at night, who carried scars she could not see. They were two people from different worlds, yet somehow their worlds had collided, not by choice, but by survival. And in that collision, something fragile and new was beginning to form. The city pulsed beyond the glass walls, endless neon and restless traffic. But inside the penthouse, time began to slow into its own rhythm. Days passed with an almost fragile calm, each one adding a thin layer of trust between Adrian and Maya. In the mornings, he left fresh clothes for her soft cotton shirts and simple jeans, chosen by his assistant without questions. At first, she resisted, afraid to accept anything that felt like luxury, but eventually, practicality won. She could not live forever in torn uniforms and oversized shirts. When she stepped into the kitchen wearing jeans that actually fit, Adrian looked up from his laptop, his gaze lingering for a fraction longer than it should have. "You look comfortable," he said quietly. Maya's cheeks warmed, and she busied herself with pouring coffee, pretending not to notice the weight of his eyes. It was not lust in his stare, not only that, it was something searching, almost reverent, as if he could not believe she was real and sitting in his home. One evening he returned from a board call, visibly tense. his jaw tight, his tie still knotted. He rarely brought his frustration out of the office, but tonight the pressure of investors' deadlines and constant scrutiny clung to him. He poured a drink, something dark and sharp, and leaned against the window, watching the storm gather over the skyline. Maya entered quietly, carrying a plate of food she had cooked with hesitant hands. She set it down near him without a word. Adrian looked at the dish, then at her, his expression softening. "You cooked this," she nodded. "It is nothing special, just pasta." He tasted it, and for the first time that day, the steel in his shoulders eased. "It is perfect," he said, and he meant it. That night marked the beginning of small rituals. She would cook. Sometimes he would teach her how to operate the espresso machine. They would sit together on the balcony with the city stretched beneath them. Words were not always necessary. Their silences became less heavy, more companionable, threaded with something that grew slowly, invisibly. One Saturday afternoon, he found her in the living room, crouched on the floor with sketchbooks spread around her. She was drawing lines quick and sure, a world unfolding under her pencil. Adrian watched from the doorway until she noticed him. Embarrassed, she closed the sketchbook quickly, but he stepped forward. "May I see?" She hesitated, then handed it over. The page showed the city skyline, but twisted, fractured into broken shards that somehow formed a whole. Adrian traced the lines with his eyes struck by the way she had captured both chaos and beauty. "You are talented," he said. Her voice was barely audible. "I used to dream of art school, but dreams cost money." He handed the book back carefully. "Maybe it is time to dream again." Maya looked at him, disbelief in her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like that, as though she were more than survival, as though she might still have a future. That night the air shifted. The tension between them, long restrained, thickened into something undeniable. It was in the way his hand brushed hers when he passed her a glass, in the way she lingered near him on the balcony, in the charged silence when their eyes met. It was attraction, yes, but tempered by fear, by scars, by the weight of everything unspoken. Adrian was careful, too careful. He knew what power could do, how easily it could wound. He kept his distance, but sometimes distance felt like torment. One rainy evening they sat together on the sofa, the sound of the storm wrapping the penthouse in its cocoon. Maya pulled her knees up, wearing one of his sweaters that drowned her frame. The sleeves slipped back, revealing faint marks on her wrists. Adrian's chest tightened, and without thinking, he reached over, covering her hand with his. She tensed, every muscle bracing, but he did not move closer. He only let his warmth seep into her cold fingers, steady and patient. "You are safe here," he said quietly. Her eyes filled, and she whispered, "I do not know how to believe that." "Then let me prove it," he answered. She turned her face away, but her hand did not leave his. The days unfolded like this, small steps, fragile progress. Maya began to laugh, more soft bursts that startled even herself. Adrian began to leave the office, earlier drawn back to the quiet presence waiting in his home. Yet with every step forward came hesitation. One night she stood at the edge of the balcony, the city glittering below. Adrian joined her, standing close, but not touching. "You do not have to keep me here," she said suddenly. "I know I am a problem you do not need." Adrian looked at her sharply. "You are not a problem. You are the first thing in years that has felt like life." Her breath caught, and for a moment, the space between them burned with possibility. She turned away, afraid of what her heart might betray. Still, the seed had been planted, and both of them knew it. The turning point came when he took her to an art exhibit downtown. She resisted at first, afraid of crowds of being seen, but Adrian's steady assurance coaxed her along. The gallery was filled with color, with canvases that spoke of pain and joy and everything in between. Maya stood before one piece, a storm of reds and blacks, and whispered, "This is what it feels like inside." Adrian glanced at her, then at the painting, and said, "Then maybe art is how you heal." She looked at him, something shifting in her eyes. That night, when they returned, she lingered near him longer than usual. On the balcony, the wind tangled her hair, and he reached to brush it back, his fingers trembling. She closed her eyes, leaning into the touch, just slightly enough to undo him. The kiss almost happened, balanced on the edge of their restraint, but she pulled back at the last second, whispering, "I cannot, not yet." Adrian swallowed hard, forcing distance again. "I will wait," he said simply. In the days that followed, the attraction between them became a quiet storm. Every glance carried weight, every touch threatened to break boundaries. But it was not just desire, it was the way she began to find herself in his presence, the way he began to remember what it felt like to care without fear. Healing and tension danced together, a fragile rhythm that neither of them could escape. And beneath it all, a question lingered unspoken. How long before the past they both feared came knocking on their door again? The peace they built was fragile like glass, resting on the edge of a table, waiting for the wrong hand to push. Adrian knew it, felt it, in the quiet moments when Maya's smile flickered and died at the sound of a phone ringing, or when she froze at sudden footsteps in the hallway. Healing was happening, yes, but shadows were never far. The shadows wore the name Victor Cross. Victor was not the kind of man who accepted defeat. When Maya vanished from his reach, his ego burned hotter than his desire. In his world, women were possessions, and possessions did not escape. He had built empires on fear, on loyalty bought with money, and broken with fists. Maya running to Adrian Hayes, of all men, was not just a betrayal. It was humiliation, and men like Victor fed on reputation. He began quietly pulling strings. A whisper to a journalist, a photo leaked of Maya entering Adrian's tower, a headline crafted to bleed scandal. Billionaire CEO hides mistress in penthouse. Social media devoured it, hungry for gossip, for another tale of the rich bending rules. By the time Adrian's board met the following week, tension filled the conference room like smoke. Shareholders demanded answers. His assistant handed him a folder thick with tabloid clippings and online chatter. Adrian flipped through the pages, each headline darker than the last. The accusation was clear. Maya was nothing more than a girl he had bought a toy to pass the time. Adrian closed the folder with deliberate calm, though inside fury coiled like a storm. He left the meeting early, ignoring the stares, and returned home to find Maya sitting curled on the sofa, her phone clutched in white-knuckled hands. She had seen it all. Her eyes lifted to him, wide and broken. "They are right," she whispered. "This is what I am." The words sliced him open. "No," he said firmly, crossing the room. "You are not what they say. You are not what he made you." She shook her head violently, tears streaking her face. "You will lose everything because of me. Your company, your reputation, all of it. I cannot be the reason you fall." She stood as if to leave, but Adrian caught her wrist, gentle but unyielding. "Look at me," he demanded, his voice low. I built everything I have from nothing. I will not lose it because I chose to protect someone worth more than all of it combined. Her breath hitched her body, trembling in the grip of his conviction. But doubt still haunted her eyes. That night she waited until he fell asleep, then slipped quietly out of the penthouse. She could not drag him further into her chaos. She had survived alone before. She would survive again. But she underestimated him. When Adrian woke to find her gone, panic ripped through him like lightning. He searched the streets in the pouring rain, his suit soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead. He called her name into alleys and over subway grates, ignoring the looks of strangers. Hours later, he found her near the old neighborhood where she once lived, sitting on the steps of a boarded-up store. Her face pale, her arms wrapped tight around herself. Adrian approached slowly, his breath ragged. Maya lifted her head, eyes red. "You should not be here." He crouched in front of her, his hand trembling as he touched her cheek. "You think leaving will save me, but it is killing me." She shook her head. "You do not understand. I am broken." He leaned closer, his voice fierce. "The world calls you broken, but you are the only thing that makes me feel whole." Tears spilled from her eyes, and for the first time, she did not pull away when he pulled her into his arms. The rain fell around them cold and relentless, but in that moment neither cared. For a fragile heartbeat, they were both free. But the storm was not done. Victor struck harder. Days later, Maya was photographed again, this time leaving the penthouse with Adrian by her side. The image was splashed across tabloids framed as proof of the scandal. Reporters swarmed outside. The tower cameras flashing questions shouted, "Who is she, Adrian? Is she your mistress? Are you paying her rent?" Adrian shielded Maya with his body, his hand steady on her back, as he guided her through the crowd. He said nothing, but his silence only fueled the fire. Inside, Maya crumbled. She could not escape the headlines, the whispers. She felt like the cage had followed her here, invisible bars built from judgment. One evening she confronted Adrian, her voice raw. "You cannot keep me. Not when the world sees me as filth. You will lose everything." He looked at her with eyes like steel. "Then let them take it. I will not lose you." She wanted to believe him, but fear gnawed her insides. What kind of love could survive this kind of storm? Adrian knew the answer. It would be tested soon enough, because Victor was not finished. The showdown was coming. He could feel it in the way Victor's name began appearing in business rumors, in the way his lawyers hinted at lawsuits, in the way shadows seemed to gather closer to Maya every time she stepped outside. And when Victor finally appeared, he would not come alone. The day Victor came was bright and deceptively calm. The kind of Manhattan afternoon when the sky seemed polished and the streets hummed with the rhythm of ordinary life. But Adrian had been expecting it the way a soldier expects the next battle, even in moments of quiet. He had seen the signs, the reporters who lingered longer. Outside the tower, the anonymous threats delivered to his office. The whispers in financial circles that Victor was moving against him. Adrian waited with patience sharpened into steel. He had faced hostile takeovers, political games, cutthroat negotiations. But this was different. This was not about power or wealth. This was about Maya. She had grown stronger in recent weeks, a little more laughter in her voice, a little more confidence in her step. She had begun sketching daily filling pages with color and shapes, reclaiming a piece of herself. Adrian watched her heal, proud but wary. knowing Victor's shadow still reached for her. That afternoon, Maya was in the study, bent over her notebook, when the dogs barked from the lobby a deep warning. Adrian rose from the sofa and went to the window. He saw them coming before the call from security confirmed it. 3 black cars pulled up outside Hayes Tower, sleek and dark, their engines low and predatory. Men stepped out, all sharp suits and colder eyes. At the center of them was Victor Cross. He wore a tailored jacket, his silver cufflinks glinting in the sun, but no clothing could hide the rot beneath his polished smile. Adrian's pulse slowed. He had expected this moment, and now it was here. He opened the study door and spoke calmly. "Maya, stay inside. Do not come out until I tell you." She looked up, alarm flashing across her face. "Adrian!" He cut her off gently but firmly. "Trust me." He stepped into the lobby as Victor entered, flanked by 2 men built like walls. Reporters followed, cameras, flashing microphones thrust forward. The security guards held them back, but the noise swelled. Victor raised his hands as if to calm the chaos, his smile practiced for the press. "Adrian Hayes," he called, his voice smooth. "Hiding my property in your tower." Adrian stood, tall hands at his sides, voice even. "She is not your property." Victor chuckled, the sound hollow. "She is my wife. Papers signed, legally bound. She belongs with me." Adrian took 1 step forward, his eyes locking on Victor's. "A wife is not a chain, and you do not own her. What you call law is nothing but control." The crowd hushed, sensing the weight of the moment. Victor's smile slipped, revealing the menace beneath. "Careful, Hayes. You may be rich, but even you cannot fight every enemy." Adrian did not flinch. Then he raised his voice, clear enough for the cameras to catch. "I do not care how much power you claim. If you want her, you will have to go through me." A murmur rippled through the reporters' flashes, popping like lightning. Victor's men stepped forward, but Adrian lifted a hand. "Not here, not in front of them. If you want to settle this, we will settle it, but the world will see who you are." Victor's eyes narrowed. He hated exposure. His empire thrived in shadows, in whispered threats. The cameras were his weakness. Adrian knew it and pressed harder. "You think people will stand with you when they see the bruises you left, when they hear her voice telling the truth." Maya appeared in the doorway, then pale but resolute. Adrian turned, his heart pounding. No, he had wanted her safe hidden. But Maya stepped forward, her voice trembling but loud enough to carry. "I am not your wife. You forced me. You hurt me. And I will not go back." The crowd gasped. Reporters surged forward, questions exploding. Victor's face turned crimson, his composure cracking. He lunged, but Adrian moved first, stepping between him and Maya, his body a shield. Security closed in. Flashes blinded, the lobby chaos erupted. Yet in the center of it, Adrian stood unshaken, his voice thunderous. "If you touch her again, I swear the next place you see will be a courtroom or a grave." Victor froze, hatred boiling in his eyes, but the cameras were everywhere. His men pulled him back, whispering caution. He adjusted his jacket with forced, calm-spat words like venom. "This is not over." He turned and stalked out, the black cars swallowing him again. The lobby fell into uneasy silence, broken only by the reporters still shouting questions. Adrian ignored them, turning to Maya. Her face was streaked with tears, but there was strength there too. Strength that had not been visible weeks ago. She looked at him as if seeing him anew, not just as a billionaire or protector, but as the man who had chosen to stand unshaken in front of the storm. Back upstairs, the penthouse felt different. The confrontation had been public, irreversible. Adrian's company would face backlash. Investors might retreat, but none of it mattered. He had made his choice. Maya sat on the sofa, her body still trembling. Adrian knelt in front of her, his hands gently covering hers. "You never have to face him alone again." She whispered, her voice breaking. "Why risk everything for me?" Adrian met her gaze, his eyes raw. "Because you are not everything I could lose. You are everything I have found." Something in her broke, then not in pain, but in surrender. She leaned into him, her forehead resting against his chest, her tears soaking his shirt. He held her close, steady as stone, and for the first time in years, both of them felt the weight of silence lift. In the days that followed, the noise outside grew. Headlines debated, analysts speculated, but within the penthouse the world grew smaller, calmer. Adrian continued his work, but his eyes always returned to her. Maya began to paint, again colors, spreading across canvases that filled the once sterile rooms. They were not lovers yet, not in body, but in every look, every touch. The bond deepened, undeniable. The showdown had not only driven Victor back, it had solidified something unspoken between them, something that neither scandal nor shadow could undo. The weeks that followed were quiet, compared to the storm that had raged before. Victor disappeared from the public eye, licking his wounds, his empire shaken by the exposure. The tabloids moved on to fresher scandals, and Adrian's company stabilized under his steady hand. Inside the penthouse, life settled into something that almost resembled peace. Maya's laughter returned in pieces light as glass wind chimes. She spent mornings sketching in the study, afternoons trying recipes she found online, evenings sitting with Adrian on the balcony, the city glowing beneath them like a galaxy within reach. She was healing, and Adrian watched it happen with awe. Yet peace has a way of concealing new storms. One morning Maya did not come to breakfast. Adrian knocked gently on her door, then opened it when silence answered. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands pressed against her stomach, her face pale as if she had seen a ghost. Adrian's heart lurched. "What is it?" he asked softly. She lifted her eyes to his, wet and terrified. "I think I am pregnant." The words hung in the room like thunder. Adrian froze, every possibility crashing through him at once. He crossed the room, kneeling before her. "Are you sure?" She nodded, trembling. "I went to the clinic yesterday. I wanted to be certain before I told you." He searched her face, saw the fear there, the shame, the weight of questions she could not voice. Finally, she whispered the one that burned her throat. "What if it is not yours?" The air shattered. Adrian's breath caught not because of doubt, but because of the pain he saw in her eyes. She looked at him as if bracing for rejection, for disgust, for the door to close the way it always had in her life. Instead, Adrian took her hands in his, firm and steady. "Then it will be ours," he said simply. "No matter what." Maya's eyes widened, tears spilling freely. She shook her head. "How can you say that? You deserve better. You deserve someone unbroken, someone pure." Adrian lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I do not want better. I want you. Broken or whole, scarred or healing, I want you. And that child, no matter whose blood it carries, will never carry his sin. Only yours, only mine, only what we give it." Maya's body shook with sobs not of despair but of release. For the first time, the shame she had carried like a chain began to loosen. She collapsed into his arms, and he held her as though she were the most fragile and the most precious thing he had ever been given. The days that followed were different. Maya moved with a new kind of gravity, cautious but not afraid. Adrian stayed beside her steady and unwavering. When they went into the city, whispers followed them, but Adrian no longer cared. He walked proudly, with her hand in his, as though daring the world to challenge what they had chosen. At the market, he bought baby blankets with a quiet smile, ignoring the way clerks glanced between them. At church, he sat beside her, their hands intertwined, unmoved by the murmurs around them. People whispered, but people always whispered. Adrian had learned long ago that power was not in silencing voices, but in choosing which ones to hear. One evening, Maya unveiled a painting she had been working on in secret. It showed a flower blooming from a cracked stone, its petals vibrant against the gray. She set it before him, shyly afraid he might dismiss it as childish. Adrian stared for a long moment, his throat tight. "It is beautiful," he said finally. She smiled, small but real, the kind of smile that reached her eyes. He hung the painting in the center of the penthouse, where every guest would see it, where Maya would see it every day. It was more than art, it was a declaration. Months later, as the city's skyline glowed with spring, Adrian stood on the balcony with Maya beside him, her belly beginning to round beneath her dress. The wind carried the faint hum of taxis and laughter, but here above it all there was only quiet. He looked at her, at the woman who had come to him, broken and ashamed, and now stood with her head high, her eyes steady. She had become more than survival. She had become his future. Because sometimes the richest thing a man can give is not money, not power, but his heart. And Adrian Hayes, the billionaire, who had once thought himself too broken to love again, had given his entirely.